In the opulent world of French aristocracy, where secrets fester behind gilded doors and alliances are forged with cold precision, a marriage meant to unite two powerful families instead unravels into a web of betrayal, greed, and revenge. What begins as a hopeful union between William and Alice quickly spirals into a chilling game of deception when love is abandoned for lust, loyalty is traded for power, and bloodlines become battlegrounds. As Alice uncovers the sinister truth about her husband's ambitions, she must confront not only his treachery but also the darkness within herself to reclaim what was stolen. But in this intricate dance of vengeance, can redemption ever truly be found, or will the cost of justice leave her unrecognizable? The union of the Devereux and Montclair families was a spectacle that had been whispered about in aristocratic circles for months. Both families were pillars of French high society, their names synonymous with wealth, influence, and tradition. The marriage of William Devereux and Alice Montclair was not born out of love but necessity, a strategic alliance to consolidate power, merge fortunes, and secure the legacy of two dynasties teetering on the edge of modernity. It was a marriage arranged by their parents, sealed with contracts and champagne toasts but devoid of sentiment. To the outside world, it was a grand celebration, an event steeped in opulence and ceremony. For Alice, however, it was something far more personal, an opportunity to rewrite her story. Alice had always been a dreamer, even as a child growing up in the shadow of her family's sprawling estate. She would often retreat to the library, losing herself in novels where love conquered all, where fate brought together souls destined to find happiness. Though she knew this marriage was not one of romance, she allowed herself to hope. Her few encounters with William had left her intrigued. He was reserved, yes, but there was a quiet intensity about him that made her believe he might be capable of depth, of kindness. She imagined a future where they could grow to understand each other, where mutual respect might blossom into something more profound. Perhaps, she thought, this arrangement could lead to genuine companionship, or even love. William, on the other hand, harbored no such illusions. From the moment the ink dried on the agreement, he viewed the marriage as a transaction, a means to an end. His ambitions stretched far beyond the confines of familial duty. He craved freedom, power, and control, things he believed his current life denied him. For William, the marriage was simply another step toward achieving those goals. He played the part of the dutiful fiancé well, charming Alice's parents and maintaining a veneer of civility whenever necessary. Yet beneath the polished exterior lay a man consumed by selfish desires, willing to manipulate anyone or anything to achieve his aims. On the day of the wedding, the grandeur of the occasion was matched only by its underlying tension. The ceremony took place in a centuries-old cathedral, its stained glass windows casting kaleidoscopic patterns across the marble floors. Guests dressed in their finest attire filled the pews, murmuring about the union that would bind two of France's most prominent families. As Alice walked down the aisle, her heart fluttered, not just from nerves but from the faint possibility that this day marked the beginning of something meaningful. She clung to the hope that William might feel the same, that the vows they exchanged would serve as a foundation for something real. But as the final blessing was bestowed and the applause erupted, William's true nature began to reveal itself. Barely an hour after the reception commenced, he slipped away unnoticed, leaving behind a wife who stood frozen in disbelief. Alice searched for him amidst the revelry, her stomach sinking with every unanswered call and unopened door. When she finally realized he was gone, the weight of his betrayal hit her like a physical blow. Not only had he abandoned her on their wedding day, but whispers soon reached her ears. He had fled to Paris with his lover, a woman whose name Alice didn't even know. Alone in the cavernous mansion that was now her home, Alice felt the crushing loneliness descend upon her. The echoes of laughter and music from earlier in the evening seemed distant and hollow, mocking her naivety. Each room she entered amplified her sense of isolation, the ornate furnishings and gilded mirrors reflecting only her despair. What little hope she had nurtured for a shared future evaporated in an instant, replaced by a gnawing emptiness. She couldn't fathom how someone could so callously discard her, especially on a day meant to symbolize unity and commitment. Unbeknownst to Alice, William's actions were merely the first act in a calculated game of deception. While she grappled with her shattered dreams, he moved swiftly to execute his plans. Behind closed doors, he plotted to seize control of the Montclair family's vast assets, using his charm and cunning to manipulate those around him. To the public, he maintained the facade of a devoted husband, speaking fondly of Alice at social gatherings and ensuring that sympathy flowed in her direction. But in private, he treated her with cold indifference, dismissing her presence as if she were nothing more than a ghost haunting his ambitions. It wasn't long before Alice began to notice subtle signs of William's duplicity. Documents requiring her signature appeared on her desk without explanation, their contents cloaked in legal jargon she struggled to decipher. Friends and acquaintances relayed stories of William's warmth and concern, painting a picture of a man deeply invested in his wife's well-being. Yet when she sought him out, he avoided her gaze, his words clipped and impersonal. The dissonance between his public persona and private behavior unsettled her, planting seeds of suspicion that would soon take root. As weeks turned into months, Alice found herself trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by luxury but devoid of agency. William's machinations grew bolder, his schemes more intricate. With each passing day, the truth became clearer. This marriage was not a partnership, it was a prison. And William was not merely indifferent to her suffering. He was orchestrating it. Despite the pain and humiliation, Alice refused to succumb entirely. Somewhere deep within her, a spark of defiance flickered to life. If William thought he could destroy her, he was gravely mistaken. She vowed to fight back, though she had yet to realize just how far his treachery would extend, or how much she would have to lose before reclaiming what was rightfully hers. Alice's suspicions hardened into certainty as she pieced together the fragments of William's deceit. At first, the clues were subtle. A letter left carelessly on his desk, a phone call abruptly ended when she entered the room, but over time the evidence mounted, painting a chilling portrait of betrayal. One evening, while wandering through the labyrinthine halls of the mansion, she stumbled upon a locked study she had never noticed before. Driven by a mix of curiosity and dread, she managed to pick the lock, her hands trembling as she pushed open the heavy oak door. Inside, she discovered a treasure trove of incriminating documents, forged signatures, falsified bank statements, and meticulously detailed plans to siphon the Montclair fortune into offshore accounts. Among the papers was a chilling blueprint labeled Phase 2, outlining the staged car accident that would eliminate her family once and for all. The revelation struck Alice like a thunderclap. Her knees buckled and she sank to the floor, clutching the papers as tears streamed down her face. Her parents, her younger brother, everyone she loved, had been killed in what the authorities had ruled a tragic accident. Now, staring at the cold, calculated plan before her, she realized it had been anything but. William's cruelty knew no bounds. He had orchestrated their deaths with the same precision he applied to dismantling her family's legacy. The grief she had buried beneath layers of anger and determination resurfaced with overwhelming force, threatening to consume her. Yet as she sat there, surrounded by the evidence of his crimes, a fierce resolve crystallized within her. She would not let William win. She owed it to her family to expose him, to ensure that justice was served. In the days that followed, Alice transformed. Timid young woman who had once hoped for a loving marriage disappeared, replaced by a strategist driven by vengeance. She began to document every interaction with William, recording his manipulative tactics and cataloging his illegal activities. She installed hidden cameras throughout the mansion, capturing his clandestine meetings with his lover and their co-conspirators. Late at night, when the household slept, she scoured financial records and traced money trails, uncovering layer after layer of corruption. Each discovery fueled her determination, sharpening her focus and strengthening her resolve. But William was no fool. Sensing that Alice was onto him, he escalated his efforts to break her spirit. He orchestrated scenarios designed to isolate her further, spreading rumors among their social circle that she was unstable, possibly even dangerous. At dinner parties and charity events, guests would whisper behind their fans, casting pitying glances her way. "Poor Alice," they murmured, shaking their heads. "She hasn't been the same since the tragedy." William played the role of the concerned husband to perfection, publicly defending her while privately undermining her at every turn. He planted doubts in the minds of her few remaining allies, cutting off her support system and leaving her increasingly alone. His attacks were not limited to her reputation. William and his lover devised elaborate schemes to pressure Alice into signing over the remaining assets of the Montclair estate. They staged accidents, tripping her on the stairs, tampering with her car brakes, and blamed her clumsiness, suggesting she was unfit to manage such a vast inheritance. On one harrowing occasion, she narrowly escaped being poisoned after drinking from a glass of wine laced with sedatives. By the time she realized something was wrong, her vision blurred and her limbs went limp, rendering her helpless. It was only the intervention of a loyal maid, who had grown suspicious of William's behavior, that saved her life. The maid called for medical assistance, claiming Alice had suffered a sudden illness, and the incident was brushed aside as an unfortunate mishap. Despite these attempts to harm her physically and emotionally, Alice refused to yield. She adopted a dual strategy. Outwardly, she feigned submission, allowing William to believe he was wearing her down. Inwardly, she plotted her counterattack with meticulous precision. She began building a network of allies, quietly reaching out to former employees of the Montclair family who had been dismissed under dubious circumstances. Many were eager to help, their loyalty to the Montclairs outweighing any fear of William's wrath. Together, they formed a secret coalition dedicated to unraveling his empire. One of Alice's most significant breakthroughs came when she uncovered a series of illicit business deals involving shell companies linked to William's enterprises. These deals, which included money laundering and arms trafficking, implicated not only William but also several influential figures in French society. Realizing the potential leverage this information provided, Alice carefully compiled dossiers on each individual, ensuring she had enough ammunition to dismantle their collective web of corruption. She knew that exposing these crimes would not only bring William to justice but also send shockwaves through the upper echelons of power, shattering the facade of respectability that protected men like him. Yet even as Alice gathered strength and resources, the emotional toll of her battle weighed heavily on her. Nights were the hardest, when the silence of the mansion pressed in on her and memories of her family flooded her mind. She replayed moments of laughter and love, haunted by the knowledge that they had been stolen from her. There were times when despair threatened to overwhelm her, when the enormity of what she had lost seemed insurmountable. But then she would remember her brother's bright smile, her mother's gentle embrace, her father's unwavering belief in her, and the fire within her would reignite. They deserved justice, and she would stop at nothing to deliver it. As Alice delved deeper into William's world, she became acutely aware of the risks she was taking. Every step forward brought her closer to the truth, but it also placed her squarely in the crosshairs of a man who had proven himself capable of anything. Still, she pressed on, driven by a combination of grief, anger, and an unyielding determination to reclaim her identity. She was no longer the naive bride who had walked down the aisle hoping for love. She was a survivor, a fighter, and she would not rest until William paid for everything he had done. The night Alice uncovered the blueprint for her family's murder marked a turning point, not only in her quest for justice but in her understanding of the depths to which human depravity could sink. Sitting amidst the damning evidence, her mind raced with fragmented thoughts, each more horrifying than the last. How could someone she had trusted, even fleetingly, plan such atrocities? The betrayal cut deeper than any wound, slicing through the fragile remnants of her faith in humanity. Yet, amid the anguish, a strange clarity emerged. For the first time, Alice confronted the raw reality of her situation. She was utterly alone, stripped of everything except her will to survive. And survival, she realized, required a transformation she hadn't anticipated. In the weeks that followed, Alice began to withdraw into herself, constructing walls to shield her emotions from the torrent of pain and anger threatening to consume her. She stopped attending social events, avoided conversations with acquaintances, and retreated into the shadows of the mansion she once despised. Outwardly, she appeared broken, a woman undone by grief and isolation. But inside, she was undergoing a metamorphosis. The Alice who had dreamed of love and happiness was fading, replaced by someone colder, sharper, and infinitely more calculating. She learned to compartmentalize her emotions, locking away her sorrow and rage in favor of relentless focus. Every decision, every action became a calculated move in a chess game where the stakes were life and death. Her newfound detachment allowed her to observe the world around her with clinical precision. She studied William's mannerisms, noting the subtle shifts in his tone when he lied or the fleeting smirks that betrayed his satisfaction at her perceived weakness. She memorized the routines of his lover, charting their movements and identifying vulnerabilities. Most importantly, she honed her ability to anticipate their next moves, staying one step ahead in a deadly dance of deception. This heightened awareness came at a cost, however. The empathy that had once defined her, the capacity to see the good in others, to hope for redemption, began to erode. People became pieces on a board, tools to be used or discarded as needed. Even the memory of her family, once a source of comfort, now served as fuel for her mission. Their faces lingered in her mind, not as reminders of love but as symbols of what she had lost and what she intended to reclaim. This shift in perspective brought both empowerment and alienation. On one hand, Alice felt stronger than ever before. She reveled in her ability to outmaneuver William, to turn his own tactics against him. She took satisfaction in the small victories, intercepting a forged document before it could be signed, planting false information to mislead his allies, or catching him off guard with a biting remark that hinted at her growing knowledge of his schemes. These moments gave her a sense of control, a fleeting illusion of power in a life dominated by chaos. On the other hand, the emotional distance she cultivated left her feeling hollow. She missed the warmth of human connection, the simple joy of sharing a laugh or confiding in someone who cared. Yet, she convinced herself that these feelings were luxuries she could no longer afford. Empathy, she reasoned, was a liability in a world governed by cruelty. As Alice navigated this precarious balance, she found herself grappling with questions about her own identity. Who was she becoming in the wake of her losses? Was she still the same person who had dreamed of love and happiness, or had the weight of her circumstances forged an entirely new version of herself? These reflections often surfaced late at night, when the mansion fell silent and the darkness seemed to echo her inner turmoil. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, searching for traces of the girl she used to be. Sometimes she saw glimpses of her old self in the curve of her smile or the sparkle in her eyes. Other times, the image staring back at her felt foreign, almost unrecognizable. It frightened her to think that the person she had become might be irretrievably different from the one she had started as. Despite these doubts, Alice refused to surrender to despair. Instead, she channeled her fear and uncertainty into action, using them as catalysts for growth. She immersed herself in learning, devouring books on psychology, strategy, and criminal law. She practiced public speaking, rehearsing speeches in front of the mirror until her voice carried authority rather than vulnerability. She even took up self-defense training, determined to protect herself should the need arise. Each skill she acquired bolstered her confidence, reinforcing her belief that she could outwit William and reclaim her life. Slowly but surely, she began to rebuild her sense of self, not as the victim she had been but as the architect of her own destiny. Yet, for all her progress, Alice remained acutely aware of the fragility of her position. William's grip on power extended far beyond the confines of their marriage, reaching into the highest echelons of French society. His network of allies included politicians, corporate executives, and law enforcement officials, all of whom owed him favors or feared his retribution. Exposing his crimes would require more than courage. It would demand flawless execution and unwavering resolve. Alice knew that a single misstep could mean the difference between victory and annihilation. The burden of this responsibility weighed heavily on her shoulders, but she bore it willingly, knowing that failure was not an option. Through it all, Alice's journey of self-discovery became intertwined with her quest for justice. Each challenge she faced forced her to confront her fears, test her limits, and redefine her values. She learned to trust her instincts, to rely on her intellect rather than her emotions, and to embrace the complexity of her dual nature, the compassionate dreamer who longed for peace and the ruthless avenger who demanded retribution. These contradictions no longer felt like flaws but rather strengths, enabling her to navigate the treacherous landscape of her reality. By the time she stood ready to strike back against William, Alice had transformed into a force to be reckoned with, a woman who understood the cost of survival and was prepared to pay it. And so, as she finalized her plans, gathering allies and assembling evidence, Alice looked inward one last time. She acknowledged the pain and loss that had shaped her, honoring the memory of her family without letting it define her. She accepted the changes within herself, recognizing that growth often comes at great expense. And she reaffirmed her commitment to the path she had chosen, knowing that the road ahead would be fraught with danger but certain that she had the strength to endure. Whatever the outcome, she vowed to emerge not just victorious but whole, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the indomitable will to reclaim what is lost. The night Alice was taken, the air was thick with tension, a prelude to the storm that would follow. She had been trailing William and his lover Camille for weeks, gathering evidence of their illegal dealings. Her careful surveillance had led her to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Paris, where they conducted shadowy transactions under the cover of darkness. That evening, armed with a camera and a notebook, she crept closer than usual, her pulse quickening with every step. The stakes were higher than ever. She was close to exposing their entire operation. But as she crouched behind a stack of crates, snapping photos and jotting down details, she failed to notice the figure approaching from behind. A sharp blow to the back of her head sent her sprawling to the ground, her equipment scattering across the concrete floor. Dazed and disoriented, Alice struggled to focus as rough hands hauled her to her feet. Through blurred vision, she recognized Camille's sneer and William's cold, detached gaze. "You're getting too curious for your own good," William said, his voice dripping with disdain. Before she could respond, a black hood was pulled over her head, plunging her into suffocating darkness. Panic surged through her veins, but she forced herself to remain calm, clinging to the lessons she had learned during her self-defense training. She counted footsteps, noted turns, and listened intently to the muffled voices around her, committing every detail to memory. They dragged her into a vehicle, the engine roaring to life as it sped away. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Alice lay bound and blindfolded in the back seat, her mind racing with possibilities. Where were they taking her? What did they plan to do? Questions swirled in her head, but she pushed them aside, focusing instead on survival. She flexed her wrists against the ropes, testing their tightness, and waited for an opportunity to strike. But as the car screeched to a halt and she was yanked out once more, she realized her chances of escape were slim. The sound of waves crashing against rocks told her they were near the coast, likely somewhere isolated where no one would hear her cries for help. Kidnappers' intentions became clear as they shoved her into a dimly lit room and tied her to a chair. Camille paced in front of her, her heels clicking against the stone floor, while William leaned casually against the wall, watching with an expression of bored indifference. "You've been a thorn in our side for far too long," Camille spat, circling Alice like a predator sizing up its prey. "We gave you a chance to sign those documents, to walk away quietly. But you just couldn't resist playing detective, could you?" Alice clenched her jaw, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. "Whatever you're planning, it won't work," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I've already sent copies of everything to people who can stop you." Camille laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the walls. "Oh, darling, you really think we haven't accounted for that? Your little friends are already being dealt with. You're completely alone." The words hit Alice like a punch to the gut, but she masked her reaction with a defiant glare. She knew better than to believe them outright. They thrived on intimidation, but doubt gnawed at the edges of her resolve. Had she underestimated them? Were her allies truly compromised? As the hours ticked by, the situation grew increasingly dire. Camille and William alternated between taunting her and debating their next move, their voices rising in frustration. Alice seized the opportunity to test her bonds again, inching her fingers toward a shard of broken glass she had spotted earlier. Her progress was agonizingly slow, each movement sending waves of pain through her battered body. Just as she managed to grasp the sharp edge, the door burst open, flooding the room with light. A tall, imposing figure stepped inside, his silhouette framed by the glow of moonlight streaming through the doorway. Before either William or Camille could react, he moved with lethal precision, disarming them in seconds. Alice blinked in disbelief as the man, Jackson, spoke in a low, commanding tone. "Leave her alone." His voice carried an authority that brooked no argument, and his presence exuded an aura of controlled power. William lunged forward, but Jackson sidestepped effortlessly, delivering a swift blow that sent him crumpling to the floor. Camille screamed, scrambling backward, but Jackson grabbed her arm and pinned her against the wall with ease. "Call off your dogs," he ordered, his tone icy. "Or I'll make sure you regret it." With William incapacitated and Camille subdued, Jackson turned his attention to Alice. He knelt beside her, his movements deliberate and efficient as he untied the ropes binding her wrists. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice softer now, though still tinged with urgency. Alice shook her head, though her body ached and her head throbbed. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson nodded curtly, helping her to her feet. "We need to leave. Now." Without waiting for a response, he ushered her out of the room, supporting her as they made their way to safety. As they drove away from the warehouse, Alice studied Jackson from the corner of her eye. He was unlike anyone she had ever encountered, his features sharp and angular, his demeanor impenetrable. Yet there was something reassuring about his presence, a steadiness that calmed her frayed nerves. "Who are you?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. Jackson glanced at her briefly before returning his focus to the road. "Someone who doesn't like bullies," he replied cryptically. When she pressed for more details, he simply smiled, a rare, fleeting expression that softened his otherwise austere face. "All you need to know is that you're safe now." Over the following days, Jackson became a constant presence in Alice's life, appearing whenever danger loomed and vanishing just as quickly. He provided her with resources, introduced her to contacts who could assist in dismantling William's network, and offered guidance without overstepping. His methods were unconventional, often bordering on reckless, but his effectiveness was undeniable. More importantly, he seemed to understand her struggles in a way no one else did. He didn't judge her for the lengths she was willing to go to achieve justice. Instead, he encouraged her to harness her anger and channel it into purposeful action. Their interactions were brief but impactful, each encounter leaving Alice with a renewed sense of determination. Jackson's unwavering support gave her the courage to push forward, even when the odds felt insurmountable. And though she couldn't fully explain it, she began to feel a connection forming between them, a bond forged in the crucible of adversity. Whether it was admiration, gratitude, or something deeper, Alice couldn't say. But one thing was certain: Jackson had changed the course of her mission, and perhaps her life, in ways she was only beginning to understand. Clock struck midnight as Alice stood in the dimly lit study of the Devereux mansion, her hands trembling slightly as she inserted the flash drive into her laptop. On the screen, files and folders sprawled open, revealing years of meticulously documented evidence. Emails detailing William's illicit business dealings, recordings of him conspiring with corrupt officials, and video footage of his intimate encounters with Camille. Each piece of evidence was a thread in the intricate web she had woven, and tonight she would pull them all taut, unraveling the carefully constructed facade that had shielded William from accountability. Her heart pounded in her chest, not with fear but with anticipation. This was the culmination of months of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and relentless determination. She was ready. Plan unfolded with military precision. First, Alice released a series of anonymous tips to investigative journalists, feeding them snippets of information that painted a damning picture of William's operations. Within hours, headlines began to surface online, sparking outrage among the public and prompting calls for an official inquiry. Simultaneously, she activated a digital countdown timer on her laptop, set to release the full cache of evidence directly to law enforcement agencies and major media outlets if William attempted to evade capture. It was a failsafe, ensuring that even if she faltered, the truth would see the light of day. Next, Alice turned her attention to Camille. Using the network of allies she had cultivated, she leaked compromising photos and videos of Camille's affair with William to social media platforms. Posts spread like wildfire, igniting a firestorm of condemnation. Comment sections erupted with vitriol, accusing Camille of greed, betrayal, and moral bankruptcy. Within days, she was forced to resign from her prestigious job at a leading fashion house, her reputation in shambles. The online community's wrath followed her everywhere, driving her into hiding as she desperately tried to escape the public eye. Alice watched the fallout unfold with grim satisfaction, knowing that Camille's humiliation was only the beginning. As the scandal intensified, Alice directed her focus toward dismantling William's empire. She had spent countless hours poring over financial records, identifying vulnerabilities in his business practices. Armed with this knowledge, she orchestrated a series of coordinated strikes, filing lawsuits against key subsidiaries of his company and freezing assets tied to illegal activities. The legal maneuvers created chaos within the organization, forcing executives to scramble for damage control. Meanwhile, she worked tirelessly to rally shareholders, presenting them with irrefutable proof of William's misconduct and urging them to demand his removal from leadership. Her efforts paid off when a group of influential investors sided with her, issuing a formal vote of no confidence that left William isolated and powerless. But Alice's greatest triumph came when she personally confronted William. Summoning every ounce of courage, she arranged a meeting under the guise of negotiating a settlement. When he arrived at the designated location, a secluded café on the outskirts of Paris, he exuded arrogance, clearly expecting her to capitulate. Instead, Alice greeted him with a steely gaze and a folder containing the most damning evidence of his crimes. "It's over," she said, her voice steady and implacable. William's smirk faltered as he flipped through the documents, his face draining of color. "You think this changes anything?" he spat, attempting to regain control. "I'll find a way out of this just like I always do." Alice leaned forward, her eyes blazing with conviction. "Not this time. You've destroyed lives, manipulated everyone around you, and thought you were untouchable. But you underestimated me." She slid a newspaper across the table, its front page emblazoned with the headline, Devereux Scandal Shakes Nation as CEO Faces Arrest Warrant. William's hand shook as he read the article, realizing the extent of the trap she had set. Before he could respond, the cafe door burst open and police officers stormed in, handcuffs ready. As they led him away, Alice remained seated, her expression unreadable. The man who had once held her fate in his hands was now a prisoner of his own making. With William detained and his empire crumbling, Alice turned her attention to reclaiming what was rightfully hers. Using the evidence she had gathered, she petitioned the courts to invalidate the fraudulent contracts William had coerced her into signing. The legal battles were arduous, stretching over months, but her persistence paid off. One by one, the properties and assets stolen from the Montclair family were returned to her name. It was a bittersweet victory. The restitution couldn't bring back her parents or her brother, but it restored a sense of justice that had long eluded her. Perhaps the most transformative aspect of Alice's journey was her takeover of William's company. Initially reluctant to assume such a monumental responsibility, she eventually embraced the challenge, viewing it as an opportunity to rebuild something meaningful from the ashes of corruption. Under her leadership, the company underwent a radical transformation. She implemented strict ethical guidelines, severed ties with questionable partners, and prioritized initiatives aimed at giving back to the community. Employees who had once feared William's tyrannical management style found themselves inspired by Alice's vision of integrity and collaboration. Slowly but surely, the tarnished brand began to regain its footing, emerging stronger and more resilient than ever before. Throughout this process, Jackson remained a steadfast ally, offering advice and support whenever she needed it. His role evolved from protector to partner, as he helped her navigate the complexities of corporate restructuring and shielded her from lingering threats. Their shared mission forged a bond that transcended mere camaraderie, blossoming into something deeper. Though neither of them spoke of it openly, there was an unspoken understanding between them, a recognition of the unique connection they had formed in the crucible of adversity. By the time the dust settled, Alice had achieved what many thought impossible. She had exposed the truth, dismantled a criminal empire, and reclaimed her family's legacy. Yet, more importantly, she had rediscovered herself. The naive bride who had once walked down the aisle hoping for love had transformed into a formidable force, capable of standing toe-to-toe with the most powerful adversaries. Her journey had been fraught with pain, loss, and unimaginable challenges, but it had also taught her the value of resilience, empathy, and self-belief. As she stood atop the rebuilt foundation of her life, Alice knew that she was no longer defined by the tragedies that had shaped her. She was a survivor, a leader, and a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue across the sprawling vineyards surrounding the newly renovated Montclair estate. It had been nearly a year since William's arrest, and Alice stood on the balcony overlooking the property, a glass of red wine in hand. The air smelled of lavender and fresh earth, a reminder of the land her family had cherished for generations. Though scars remained, both visible and invisible, she felt a profound sense of peace. The estate, once a symbol of oppression and loss, had become a sanctuary of renewal. Every corner of the mansion bore her touch, from the vibrant tapestries adorning the walls to the lush gardens that bloomed with life. It was no longer a gilded cage but a home, a testament to her resilience and determination. Jackson appeared behind her, his presence as comforting as the setting sun. He carried 2 plates laden with food, the aroma of roasted vegetables and grilled lamb wafting through the cool evening breeze. Setting them down on the wrought iron table, he joined her at the railing, his gaze sweeping over the horizon. "You've done remarkable work here," he said, his voice soft but tinged with pride. Alice smiled faintly, her fingers brushing against the stem of her wineglass. "It's not just mine," she replied. "You've been here every step of the way." Their relationship had deepened over the past months, evolving naturally from allies to confidants and finally to something more profound. Jackson's unwavering support had been instrumental in her recovery, not only from the trauma inflicted by William but also from the emotional toll of rebuilding her life. He had shown her that vulnerability was not a weakness but a bridge to connection, teaching her to trust again after years of betrayal. In return, Alice had opened herself to him, sharing her fears, hopes, and dreams with a candor she hadn't thought possible. Their bond was built on mutual respect and understanding, a partnership forged in adversity but sustained by love. Dinner passed in companionable silence, punctuated by occasional laughter and shared glances. Afterward, they strolled through the garden, the gravel crunching softly beneath their feet. Fireflies danced in the twilight, their tiny lights flickering like stars scattered across the earth. Alice paused by the rose bushes, her fingers tracing the velvety petals of a crimson bloom. "Do you remember when I first met you?" she asked, tilting her head to look at him. Jackson chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "How could I forget? You were covered in dirt, bleeding, and still managed to threaten me with a shard of glass." Alice laughed, the sound light and musical. "Well, you did break into my kidnapping," she teased, nudging him playfully. "What else was I supposed to do?" Jackson's expression softened, his humor giving way to sincerity. "You've come so far since then," he said, his voice low. "I'm proud of you, Alice. Not just for what you've accomplished, but for who you've become." Her throat tightened and she looked away, blinking back tears. The acknowledgement meant more to her than words could convey. For so long, she had defined herself by the battles she fought and the injustices she sought to rectify. But Jackson reminded her that her worth extended beyond her achievements. He saw her not as a warrior or a survivor but as a person, flawed, complex, and beautifully human. They continued walking until they reached the edge of the property, where a stone bench overlooked a tranquil pond. Sitting side by side, they watched as the moon rose, its silver light rippling across the water. Alice leaned into Jackson, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you think we can leave the past behind us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "We don't have to leave it behind," he said. "It's part of who we are. But we can choose how it shapes us. Together we can build something new." The simplicity of his words resonated deeply within her. Healing wasn't about erasing the past but integrating it into the fabric of her present, allowing it to inform her future without defining it. With Jackson by her side, she felt ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. They talked late into the night, discussing plans for the estate, the company, and their shared vision of a life filled with purpose and joy. For the first time in years, Alice dared to dream, not of revenge or vindication but of a future rooted in love and possibility. When they finally retired to the house, the warmth of the hearth greeted them, casting a cozy glow over the living room. Jackson poured them each a cup of tea and they settled onto the couch, the crackling fire providing a soothing backdrop. Alice curled up beside him, her exhaustion mingling with contentment. As she drifted off to sleep, nestled in his arms, she realized that she had found not only redemption but also a home, a place where she belonged, surrounded by love and hope. The journey had been long and arduous, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and whole. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she was truly happy. If this story of love, betrayal, and redemption resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Every subscription helps us bring these stories to life, and we'd love to have you as part of our community. Got thoughts or theories about Alice and Jackson's journey? Drop them in the comments below. We read every word and can't wait to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining us today on this emotional roller coaster. Your support means the world to us, and we hope you'll stick around because there are many more thrilling stories waiting just for you. Until next time, take care, stay inspired, and remember, even in the darkest moments, resilience can light the way. See you again soon.